Kian Gould, it's about a year, I think, since we last spoke, at least on film together. I've seen you many times around the year in airports and talking about airlines and all kinds of things. But tell us what's happened over that last year. How's the AOE journey coming along?
Yeah, so we've kind of started to go into different divisions because we have on the one hand, of course, the airport business that is still growing significantly, and we're currently in multiple tenders around the world. But at the same time, through the project of Singapore Airlines, we have decided to actually launch a separate airline edition because there are quite some overlaps, but there's also some very specific functionalities that airlines need, such as in-flight integration and flight information system integration and so on. And of course, we also have the downtown, what we now call the downtown edition, which is what we have launched at Auckland Airport. And so basically, we are starting to divide the organizations into these different focus areas. And one of the core drivers around all three of these platforms has been to drive down the initial cost to make it more attractive also for smaller players that you don't necessarily need all the complex functionalities. Because after all, our goal is to really be a solution for almost everybody in the ecosystem and not just the absolute top and biggest airports and airlines.
Well, just to pick up on the airline segment, Kian, you've just hired a very big name from the in-flight world. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it was almost a coincidence. We met Michael at PTE in London, and he saw our booth and he saw our slide about what we're doing, and he was like, this is what I've been trying to offer to the airlines for the last 15 years, working as the head of consulting for LSG. And he has actually written more than 50 digital papers and strategy papers for big carriers. And he was looking for a new opportunity, and it was a really good match. And we were looking for a new head for our airline edition. And so, I think it's a very great opportunity to now get a real insight into how airlines tick, what their focus is, outside of just sustainability, for example, and this helps us tremendously shape what we're doing for airlines now.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, my colleague Peter Marshall will be talking to Michael later, and we'll include it in this interview, but it's clearly a very major development for AOE.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk airports, in particular Auckland, Heathrow, Frankfurt. That's where it all started, your journey in this sector. How's progress with those three airports? How's performance, more importantly? And where do you see the whole airport side of your business shaping?
Those three airports where we're already live are, of course, quite different in their way how they approach the business. I would say the most successful one in regards to luxury and where we see this whole travel retail e-commerce going is certainly Heathrow. That consistent focus on high-end and luxury has really paid off. The growth rates are very impressive, and we're seeing that really a very large portion of the luxury sales are being researched and pre-ordered on the site before they happen at the airport. At the same time, in Auckland, for example, the downtown business is really flourishing as well. This was always limited in its growth by the manual process, and ever since this is end-to-end digitalized, there's no more reason to slow down onboarding of retailers. The process at the airport is super smooth with very low waiting times and so on, so that has helped that business grow significantly as well. And Frankfurt, being of course the first on the block, they have also started to shift more towards luxury now because of the learnings that we have seen from Heathrow mainly, and that is starting to pay off as well. As we are seeing from more and more airports, the core duty-free categories are not the key drivers in e-commerce. It's really about the premium products, and that is what is working very well.
Just to pick up on something you just said, Kian, I was with Richard Barker down at Auckland Airport only a week ago, and he was telling me that he was very excited by this ability to proliferate the offer with products from downtown stores. So widening, if you like, the whole ecosystem. Is that really how you see this going?
Yeah, I mean, of course, it depends a little bit on what type of airport you're working with. There are some airports who have a significant luxury footprint already, and so for them, they need to, of course, consider, is there risk to partner? On the other hand, I think that the risk is not so significant because people cannot actually necessarily check the prices downtown previous to traveling. So they don't necessarily make the decision, I'm going to buy this downtown or at the airport because of pricing. They assume it should be cheaper at the airport if it's available at the airport. So, and this is also what Richard said, the risk of cannibalization is relatively minimal. And if you are an airport that doesn't have a lot of luxury on premise, then it's a no-brainer to partner with luxury downtown stores and offer tax-free shopping downtown, get a concession fee out of it and have it delivered airside for pickup. And we're currently talking to 4 airports that want to do this now in a similar fashion than as Auckland. So that side of the business is also starting to pick up very nicely.
All right, you kind of anticipated my next question, and that was, are there any new adopters? Because our business was historically quite slow, as you know, to embrace digital generally, e-commerce specifically. Now you cracked it with 3 blue ribbon airports. What's happening with the others? Are they slow adopters, or is there a real chink of light here and you're suggesting that you're getting close with others? Tell us more about that.
Yeah. So currently we are actually in tenders with 7 airports. So the fact that it took 3 years for all of these airports to start writing tenders and getting ready for the process is definitely something we underestimated the time it would take. But the fact is that it's happening now. There are multiple airports in Europe. There are 2 airports in the US, 1 in South America, several in Asia. So it's definitely, we have started something and that's very exciting. And we had to be patient, but it's starting to pay off now. And of course, there's no offering in the world right now that does what we do. And so we are in a very good position to have a chance to win a big portion of those tenders.
All right. I want to ask you about the wider ecosystem. We talk a lot in the industry about the Trinity, being the airports, the retailers, the brands. But of course, there's a really fundamentally important other stakeholder, and that's the airlines. Now, you've just created an airline division, I understand. Airlines or in-flight retail has been considered somewhat of the poor relation in travel retail over recent years. You certainly don't see them as being the poor relation going forward if they seize the opportunity to become a new player in this new evolving ecosystem. Tell us about your philosophy around that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we looked at the airlines a couple of years back, we also considered the in-flight retailing to be a dinosaur business. Very old school processes, very difficult to customize the card to each route. The cost was not even worth it in many regards. You're flying around $50 million of inventory, of which you're only selling 1% a day. So these are all factors that made that business decreasingly attractive. And of course, we know that many of the carriers, the big ones, have already exited it or reduced it and so on. But when you think about it from a let's move out of the restrictions of selling in a cabin kind of point of view, then you realize the airline knows so much more about a passenger than most other entities that you interact with, maybe apart from Facebook and Instagram and Google. But they're not really capitalizing on this know-how that they have on you. They have global logistics networks already. They have relationships with airports globally already. They have actually all the touch points that you need in order to become an e-commerce player. They just haven't really done it yet because it's not something you can simply outsource or buy. And so more and more airlines are now realizing that if they want to do it right, they need to actually build it out as a proper division. And I think Singapore has shown exactly how this is done. As a JV is a great idea because you get the right know-how from the right partners into one company. And I think the success speaks for itself, and what we're managing to do there on a consistent basis is already very impressive.
Yeah, well, I was at that launch or relaunch, if you like, of cruiseshop.com with you. As you say, it marries an airline with a fulfillment provider, logistics provider, and obviously a procurement expert in the former DFAS, now 360. What are the fundamental values of the cruise shop proposition in terms of the difference they're bringing to the traveling consumer?
Yeah, I think you could put it all under the umbrella of anything, anywhere kind of philosophy. It's really, in the past, in-flight retail has tried to force something onto the passenger. It's basically, here's what we have, buy it or don't buy it. And the philosophy of Singapore Airlines is vastly different. It's about how can we offer the most relevant products, can we offer a huge selection of products that are important to the passengers, how can we make payment seamless, how can we make delivery seamless, how can we empower the passenger to decide what is most convenient to them, to receive it at their destination, on their seat, home delivered, and so on. Home delivery is already bigger than in-flight delivery at Singapore Airlines. So this shows that people don't necessarily want to receive the item on the plane, but they like to buy either before they're flying or while they're flying. So it's really about being there for the passenger in the most convenient way for them, and that differs vastly between geographics, passenger profiles, age, and so on.
All right. It's very early days, I know, so this might be an unfair question, but can you give us any feedback on results or findings or even surprises?
Yeah, it is very early days. From day one, we've already seen the conversion rates increase. It's funny because a lot of people would expect that to happen, but it's not actually the truth. We've done e-commerce for 20 years, and most of the time when you relaunch an e-commerce site, conversion goes down first, because people have learned behavior, they have to adjust, they have to figure out how the new site works, and so on. So the fact that this site, actually the conversions increased immediately from day one, is a very, very promising sign. We've gotten some great press. In fact, the day when they announced the new site to the entire ecosystem, the traffic was 400 times the average traffic. So it was very significant.
All right, Singapore Airlines is a major international carrier. There are a lot of smaller airlines around the world who probably either, as you say, have given up on in-flight retail or are getting by with it. It's not an important part of their business, and yet they're an important part of that ecosystem that you're telling us about. Can you tailor what you're doing to those smaller carriers around the world, the regional carriers, some of the small national carriers?
Yeah, so as it is with software technology, as the more you manage to standardize processes and procedures and technology, the more cost efficient it becomes to roll it out. So while it is always more costly to be a pioneer or an early adopter, later down the line technology becomes more available and therefore reduced in cost. What we are already doing, we've already announced that we will be rolling out Avianca. This is a much smaller scale initiative than Singapore Airlines, without the vast possibilities of delivery and fulfillment and product range and so on. But it's a way for a smaller airline to get started with a much lower capex investment and then grow it from there. So we are definitely getting ready for all sizes of airlines, and we do see also a big opportunity in low-cost carriers that don't necessarily have the volume of luxury and high-end products, but they have volume. And volume is always interesting for e-commerce because it helps streamline the processes significantly.
Okay, we've talked about airports, we've talked about airlines almost as separate entities. Now, you know that I brought in the term Trinity to the industry, the airport, the retailer, the brand, but you introduced your own term, Kian, which was the Quaternity, and that was bringing the airline, of course, in with the ecosystem. Have you had any examples yet of your kind of partnership involving both airline and airport?
Yeah, it is definitely the toughest challenge to crack yet. But what we're seeing is that both from the airlines and from the airports, there are signs of interest and signs of having conversations about it. I mean, I talked about this before, that Lufthansa and Frankfurt Airport trialed something with lounge shopping and in-flight shopping. But also the airlines that we're working with now are showing interest to do fulfillment at the airport. So for example, if you are as an airline flying to Heathrow and you cannot sell Burberry because you simply don't have it, or Chanel or Dior, then you might as well sell it for the airport for a concession fee or a commission. And so as we are getting more and more airports and airlines onto the same back-end systems and the same product information management infrastructure and so on, this becomes much easier to also sell on behalf of other airlines. And we've seen that AirAsia is starting a model like that as well with airports. However, the challenge is that that we are facing and they are also facing is that most airports don't have e-commerce. So to get to the products, to be able to sell them is quite difficult if the airport doesn't already have an airport ecosystem for e-commerce. And so typically you are limited to integrating with only a retailer, which only gives you a very small portion of the SKUs then.
Yeah, well, you've gone through what I'd call the hard yards, the tough job of convincing those early adopters that there is a big e-commerce opportunity. Just in recent days, we've published a story to say that Dubai Airports is launching a RFP to embrace the whole marketplace concept and accelerate their progress. How far down the line do you think you are in terms of the wider world of airports actually saying, you know, this is a huge opportunity?
I think it still varies from airport to airport. I think the big hubs are seeing that what Heathrow is doing is somewhat a benchmark for sure to the airport world, and many of them are trying to adopt similar techniques. But what many of them are also realizing that it's not just simply putting a site out there that has some products that you can order. It's much more than that. It's also about building a relationship with their passengers, doing B2C communication, what Heathrow has done with the loyalty program and with the actual direct marketing and email personalization and so on. These are all things that tie into that ecosystem very closely. And so we're seeing that most of the big hubs, European and Asian, are looking into it. The American hubs, some of them are starting to, but as we know, the American airports are structured quite differently and sometimes very divided by airlines managing different terminals and so on. But what has been the critical thing for us is how can we also get the mid-size airports? And in the past, a lot of them have said, we ran the numbers, this will probably not have an ROI in 5 years' time, this is too risky for us. So for these airports, for us the crucial thing was to drive down the capex, to drive down the initial investment, get them something they can work with a budget that anyone can spend, without taking a major hit on their balance sheet, and that has been the strategy. And now we are getting more and more of these, 15 to 30 million passenger airports that are showing up at our doorstep.
Absolutely. Now, two of the challenges that you face are, on the one level, ignorance of new technology, and of course fear of new technology, fear of the unknown, and fear of the financial black hole. So if you had one message to the airport community out there, perhaps also the airline community, and not insignificantly the brands, what would it be?
To be honest, I find it quite hard to understand why some airports are actually so worried. When I read announcements that airports are spending 600 million to refurbish their retail areas or to build a new shopping area for 1.2 billion, then I'm always surprised that it gets scrutinized so much to invest a few million in, which is almost like post money, in a digital experience that actually reaches almost as many passengers as your physical footprint does in a much more cost-efficient way. So how we're trying to frame it to some is like, you're opening 27 new stores and each one of them is a construction cost of 2 million or 3 million. So why don't you do a 28th store and it's a digital one, and that actually carries all the stock you have at the entire airport. And if you put it like that, some airports are starting to think about it more openly and say like, oh yeah, that actually, if you put it like that, it's more of a capex terminal investment than a marketing investment, and they tend to open to that a bit more. But when you have an airport that does in the hundreds of millions of retail revenue, a tiny little geopolitical hiccup can cost you 20, 30, 40 million dollars easily. So it's always good to have something at the back burner that can protect you from some of these variations, and digital is one of the easiest ways to do that.
Just to close, Kian, pioneers never have it easy, otherwise there'd be more pioneers. You were the pioneer of this sector. If you roll back to when you started and you compare that with where you are today, are you happy with where you are on the journey? Did you expect to be at this point now?
We expected to be a little bit further. I think by this year we had expected to be live at 7 airports. So we are 3 behind, essentially. We also didn't expect to have the best airline in the world live already by now, so that is a good surprise. And we actually had originally decided to really just focus on the airports and leave the airlines out for the time being. We're now finding that the airlines are actually easier to win over because they already think digitally. They already think in terms of data-driven commerce, in terms of passenger experience, much more than most airports. And so we are seeing that the airlines have a very big advantage in that area. So we're now kind of dividing and conquering. That's why we got Michael on board from LSG, and we're hoping that will help us accelerate the move into airlines in a similar fashion how we managed to sweep some airports off their feet in the early days.
Okay, well, Kian, I've tracked your journey from the early days. It's been a fascinating story. I wish you all the best in the no doubt equally exciting next chapter. Kian Gould, always a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Always.
Thank you.